Well, now to the latest on Hurricane Matthew, which has made landfall in South Carolina. The storm has been downgraded to Category 1 hurricane, but it still remains a major threat. It's making a northward move, taking aim at Georgia and the Carolinas. Its maximum sustained winds have dropped, but they're still 85 miles per hour, with hurricane force winds extending up to 45 miles from the center. Crews in South Carolina, they're preparing for water rescues as storm surges and flooding remain a big threat. Hurricane Matthew has killed 6 people in just Florida so far. Kris Van Cleave is in Charleston, South Carolina, with the latest. Kris, can you describe the situation? We see the water almost up to your ankles there. What can you tell us?
Well, the water has been receding for the last couple hours. That's a good sign because we're about 30 minutes from high tide here, 1 o'clock high tide. There was a lot of concern about that adding to the flooding. And this, earlier this morning, was not passable. It would be waist-deep water. So it has come way down. There are still parts of this city, though, where the water is not ankle-deep. It is knee and waist-deep, particularly around the hospital area. For a time during this storm, it had to stop accepting emergency patients because the water was waist-deep and you just couldn't drive to the hospital area. More than 400,000 people across South Carolina are without power. Downed trees, down power lines are a big problem. There are trees across parts of 95, the interstate, through parts of South Carolina. So there are still some major issues. In fact, police and the governor are urging people to stay off the streets, to not try to come back. You know, there was a widespread evacuation here in Charleston and points north and south of here. The storm's still working its way north, so folks 40, 50 miles up the road are still experiencing some of that rain and those heavy winds, whereas we're just getting sort of the trailing end of the winds. Nikki Haley, the governor here, has told people, do not try to come back. Do not try to come back today. Do not try to come back tomorrow. Realistically, damage assessments won't start coming in until tomorrow. It's an open question as to whether or not there have been any major injuries or loss of life. So far in Charleston County, no reports of that, but it's very early. Damage assessments likely won't be in until tomorrow. But this was a community that was bracing for a direct hit. They didn't get it. And so you're seeing a sigh of relief. People are starting to come out, clean up the damage, but we're talking about signs down, trees down, power lines down, not catastrophic destruction like people were preparing for, at least as far as we know so far.
Kris, you know, there are 2 messages I feel like we keep hearing over and over in the coverage. One is officials saying, don't come back, no matter what, don't come back. And the second is flooding. Why is flooding such a top concern?
All right, so the storm surge here, this is low country, so just a little bit of water above normal can cause problems. Charleston is a city that when it rains, they have flooding issues. So we saw the 3rd highest high tide on record here in the Charleston harbor today. You know, it was smaller than Hugo, but that was because the storm didn't come into Charleston at the same time high tide did. So high tide at around 9.5 feet, a little bit after midnight, Rena, had the storm here, they were bracing for, 12 feet. So you would have looked at much more. This region has had a lot of rain, so the ground's already saturated. They were expected to get 6 inches to a foot of rain from this storm, plus the flooding. So that's why trees are coming down. And when trees come down, they bring down power lines. Why they're telling people not to come back? Well, one, you've got a lot of flooded roads out there. They know what the major arteries look like. They don't know what the side streets are. They're very concerned about people driving into flooded waters, driving over or running into a downed power line that's live. Those kinds of loss of life incidents that are completely unnecessary. And we can tell you, just a couple hours ago, the state police put out a picture of one of their cruisers where the wind had taken a street sign, knocked it loose, and threw it through one of the windows of a police cruiser. And it sort of reinforces that even though, it feels like the danger has passed, we're still getting strong wind gusts after this region being hammered for over a day. And, if you've got a lot of people on the roads and debris starts flying again, that can be somebody who gets hurt unnecessarily. So the message from law enforcement to the governor has been, stay where you are. Don't try to come back if you evacuated. If you did stay put, stay home. Let them get a handle on what the real scope of the damage is here. You still have hundreds of thousands of people without power. They're doing assessments of the bridges here in Charleston to make sure the big suspension bridges weathered the storm okay. So there are still boxes to check, so to speak. And this storm, it still has to go through Myrtle Beach, and it looks like it's going to impact at least part of North Carolina before it makes its swing out to sea. So there are parts of the Palmetto State that are not out of the real nasty part of this storm yet.
You make a good point, Kris. They are still concerned about it. Kris Van Cleave in Charleston, South Carolina. Thanks, Kris.